All right, great. Good evening, everyone. I will now call to order this meeting of the Regional Planning Commission. We are in Washoe County Commission chambers, and today is
Recording in
Thursday,
progress.
September 26, 2024. The time is 6 p.m. Can we start with a roll call, please?
You got it. Harris Armstrong,
Here.
Dan Lazareski,
Here.
Michael Flick, absent. Marilyn Kramer,
Here.
Carl Nieberlein,
Here.
Rob Pierce,
Present.
Shelley Reed, also absent. Manny Becerra for
Here.
Carrie Rohrmeyer, and Alex Felto, also absent. I
Okay.
believe we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Thank you. We'll now move to salute to the flag. Commissioner Becerra, please lead us. to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll close item 2 and move to item 3 for possible action, approval of the agenda. Do I need a motion?
Usually there's a motion.
Commissioner Lazareski moved to approve the agenda as written.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion. Do we
This
have a
is
second?
Rob, I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. We'll move forward with the agenda as proposed. Closing item 3 and moving to item 4, public comment.
I don't know, unless Lauren wants to come up there. We have none.
Thank you. Seeing none, we'll close item 4 and move to item 5, approval of the minutes. For possible action, we will entertain approving the minutes from August 22nd, 2024 Regional Planning Commission meeting.
Commissioner Becerra, I move to approve.
This is Rob, I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Sorry. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. We'll close item 5 and move to item 6, business of the day. We'll start with item 6A, consideration and possible adoption of the 2024 Washoe County Consensus Forecast. Do we have a presentation?
We do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremy Smith for the record. Just responding to a member that's going to join us online. I think it's Michael Flick. Okay, so this is item 6A, and today we're talking about the 2024 Washoe County Consensus Forecast. We're excited to bring this forward for adoption today. Next slide, please. So this is something that we do every 2 years. We took over in 2014 from Washoe County staff who previously had performed this in the years prior. So we've been doing it every 2 years since 2014. And what the heck is it? Right? So a consensus forecast is an approach to forecasting and looking at the future where you try to eliminate bias. And the idea is that we bring in 4 independent sources of information about the future, and by averaging them, we are not reliant on the potential implicit bias of any one source alone. So that's kind of the first definition, if you will, of consensus and why this thing was formed in the first place. But then I always like to talk about a second definition of consensus, which is by working together at a regional level to provide this outlook and basically requiring the use of this in our long-range planning efforts, master planning, and facilities planning as one of the primary sources, we help to align the outlook of the various entities and regional agencies across the region in terms of what we can expect in the future, 20 years. And of course, we're continuously, every 2 years, doing this as things change, because we know they do. And there it is. The next bullet was, how is it used? It's a context for long-range planning, please. So those 4 independent data sources come from, traditionally, from these 4 sources. 2 local sources. One is the Nevada State Demographer, who does a projection out 20 years and also publishes annually the Governor's Certified Estimate of Population, and which we use in this process. Another forecast comes from the Truckee Meadows Water Authority as part of their resource planning. Sean Stoddard there does an excellent job and has been very accurate in his projections, so we utilize that second local projection. And then the other 2 forecast sources are Woods and Pool, a national forecasting house, and also now S&P Global. They bought formerly something that was called IHS Markit, but we've been using that same source, and it's actually the same people that have been doing that forecast for us. So those are those 4 sources. Next slide, please. And then basically what we do is we average them. So what we're looking at in this graph, we can take a little time with it. On the y-axis, we've got population in hundreds of thousands of people, and this is for Washoe County proper. Across the bottom, on the x-axis, we've got time from 2024 out to 2044. That's a 20-year chunk. And then we've got several lines, right? So the solid lines represent those independent sources, and we can go through them one by one. That line that's at the very top, that's very linear, kind of blue-colored looking, that's Woods and Pool, typically a very linear and aggressive model. Year over year, I've seen that. Below that is, in purple, that is the Tumwa estimate. That's the one Sean does. You can see it's got a little bit more of a curve. He uses a logistic approach. In red, similarly, a logistic approach done by the Nevada State Demographer. And then finally, the bottom line, which is quite a bit lower than the others, is from S&P. And I was a little concerned when I saw that because usually they line up. And if you look at the first 5 years, I think what you can see is that there's general agreement with those 3 sources of the trends, slope of the line, and their starting points are slightly different based on their models. But they're kind of tracking together, and then they diverge at the end years, which is very common. But typically that IHS line is up in there with them in those first 5 years. So I was a little concerned that maybe I'd gotten something wrong. And so I actually called the guy over there, Carl, and talked to him, and they just had a more pessimistic view of the future of our county than these other sources had. And, these national forecasting houses, they have kind of it's an aggregate model. So they do a national forecast, and then they have to have all the little subunits, all the counties add up. And so it could be a factor of somewhere else they anticipated more growth, and they kind of had to subtract from our area. But in the end, we end up averaging them to specifically avoid relying on any one particular one. That's that bias that we're trying to avoid. So we end up with the dashed lines. And in fact, there's 2 dashed lines. There's a thin or a small dot dash thing, and then there's the larger dashes. The larger dash is the average that has been adjusted to the most recent governor's certified estimate of population. And that's back from July 1 of 2023. And so we do the average straight up, and then we tack it on. We averaged also the previous year that's not shown, and tack it on to the end of the governor's certified series. And in so doing, we have a valid starting point, basically. So that ends up being the projection. What we're looking at is a total of 93,696, right, new residents in Washoe County by 2044. And realistically, this has been very similar. It's been plus or minus 100,000 every time I've done it since 2014. Yeah, pretty good, right? Yeah. So next slide, please. Oh, let's go back one, Damien. I apologize. Just to get the total number at 2044, that would be 600,000. Right now, we're at about 500,000. So that's kind of the total. Okay, so then this slide is always a fun one. It's kind of tough to interpret, especially on that small screen up there. But basically, it is all of those consensus forecast lines that have ever been created since 2003. So 2003, then they jumped to 08, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. And then the dashed line being the one that we're presenting tonight. And then that black line represents that governor's certified estimate of population from the demographer. And you can see how we've tacked the dashed line right to the end of it. And what's really interesting about the governor's certified estimate in the past few years is that it has really been reacting to the decennial census. I think 2 things, reacting to the decennial census, and further, we've had 3 state demographers in the most 4 years or so. So there's been slight differences in how the levers are pulled, if you will. But that little jump that you're seeing from basically 21 up to 22, that in that black line, is representative of a bit of a correction in terms of understanding the best information about population, which is our decennial census. Every 10 years, we get the best data point in terms of how many people we really think are here, and everything in between is really modeling based on samples. So the demographer's work has basically caught up at this point with the census value. Next one, please. This graph is about employment. So a secondary aspect of the consensus forecast is that we take a look at a forecast of employment numbers. And it's interesting. There's kind of two ways that employment is tracked by the feds and even by the local or state agencies, and that is covered employment and then total employment. So covered employment is any business or company or entity that pays unemployment insurance. It pays into the unemployment system and reports to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, basically. That's typically a lower number, and there's a delta between that and total jobs because many jobs, sole proprietorships, religious organizations, other kinds of technical type jobs, they don't pay into unemployment, but they're still jobs, and they still require potentially roadway infrastructure or whatever kind of facilities, right? It's part of the growth. So when the state demographer and TUMWA do not provide this information, so we only have two sources for this, and it's Woods and Pool and S&P. Woods and Pool provides a total job count, which is really what we're after. IHS or S&P provides a covered employment measure. And so we have done over the years a lot of work to compare statistics that are generated by two federal agencies, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the covered employment stuff, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which looks at total jobs, I believe, based on IRS filing. And we see about a 32% difference in those numbers. So what we're showing you here is that I received raw data at that bottom line from IHS. We used that relationship that we looked at those data points to up factor, if you will, that covered employment to put it into the total job. You can see the lines are not exactly the same, but pretty similar. And once again, we average them to get our total job forecast, which ends up being around 45,000 jobs. Typically, for most regions, there's a relationship of 1.6 people per job, I believe, is what it comes out to. And when I did the math on this, we're right in that ballpark. So it does seem to make sense with what I've seen previously and what is sort of an average. Okay, so those are kind of the two main components of the forecast, population being kind of the number one, but also the employment side. But there's more to it than that. We also provide, and this comes from those data sources, population age cohorts. So there's a school-aged or preschool-aged, school-age, working age, and retirement age breakdown, 2024 to 2044. You can find that in there. Then those life tables, which you see on the bottom right there, the blue, those are 5-year age cohorts. You can kind of probably notice a broadening of the base. That is an increase in senior population. And so we see a slight decrease, I believe, in the working level. We also provide a job outlook by an industry breakdown that Woods and Pool provides, loosely based on the North American Industry Classification System. So that's interesting in there too. We look at income, to both total personal income as an aggregate of the whole county and per capita. And then an important thing that we do as TMRPA, as our kind of value add to the data that's provided, is we do an analysis of growth over time, looking at our regional land designations. And that helps us understand trends in terms of where dwelling units are located. So if you look over all time at Washoe County, you're going to see a certain distribution of units locating in Washoe County, locating in Sparks, locating in Reno, or locating in our different tiers. But you can actually look at different slices of that total to understand trends. And so if you look at 20 years versus the past 10 years versus the past 5 years, you can really see that the data is showing that we're moving towards the core. We saw a 2% increase in dwelling units realized in the past 5 years towards our mixed-use core and Tier 1 areas. So our policies in the regional plan, whether or not they're driving this, I don't know, but they certainly, the reality is being reflected in what we're asking to see through our policy. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so another important component of this whole process is we are required to take, every 2 years, this 20-year outlook to the water planning bodies to make sure that the population that we're forecasting can be served by identified sustainable water resources. That was a ballot initiative that was passed back in 2008 by the people. And so I think starting in either 8 or 10, that process began. So every 2 years, I go in front of the Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission. This year that happened in August. And they are the technical advisory committee to the Western Regional Water Commission. They take a look at it and ensure that what we've identified in terms of water resources can serve that population that we're saying is coming, and then they recommend, if that's so, they recommend to the WRWC that that's the case, and we take it in front of the Western Regional Water Commission, and we do the same thing. And so to break down those numbers that are up there, basically we've got a 2024 population of 515. We've got the 602 number we talked about, so that 94,000 person increment basically. That can translate into a water demand. And so if you add up at that final 600,000, the water demand for that is around 114,000 acre feet, but identified in the Regional Water Management Plan through the work of the state engineer and all of the hydro basins that have been identified in that process, there's up to 192,000 acre feet available. So that, of course, that's the total universe of water. If we talk about basins that are actively currently serving the water supply in this region, the number's closer to 143 or 143,000 acre feet, but still well below 114,000 acre feet. So the point of this exercise so far has been, each time, that we've identified sustainable water resources to meet this population demand. So we accomplished that, and now we're here today. So what are our next steps if you guys vote to adopt this? We'll publish the updated forecast on the website, and then we will also include this, is currently now included as an appendix to the regional plan, the 2022 version. When we do the update in now December, we'll plan to put that updated version in as Appendix 3, I believe, Appendix 3. Great, okay, I'm happy to answer any questions. What's our next slide? Yep, there it is, the very easy motion. I have a hard one later, but this is the easy one. So if you have any thoughts or questions, I'm happy to address them. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions from the commission?
Sure, Commissioner Lazarski. Jeremy, do we do any back testing or weighting of the different forecasts for averaging, or is it just a straight average?
Straight average, yes.
Thanks.
You bet.
Any other questions? I have a question.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I get it.
Uh-huh.
So one of the things I noticed in the report when you get kind of into the more granular stuff, when you're talking about the breakout by employment type, there's a broad category for services, and that's the far and away the leading indicator for the most of the concentration of the jobs. How is that defined? Is it just service industry the way we kind of think about it in the Nevada context, or does it encompass broader services maybe financial services, even though that's a category above? Is it how are we defining it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, Jeremy Smith, for the record. That breakdown comes directly from Woods and Pool, and it is those industry breakdowns are a collection of NAICS divisions, those two-digit NAICS that have those specific things. But absolutely, we are able to look into the data, and if you go to our annual report website, you can see we have produced that by the two-digit NAICS. We use that in the RTC modeling as well. Just historically, we've used the Woods and Pool breakdown in this document, but we do track more information at that two-digit level. And there's a host of services. It can be health services, school services, finance, real estate, geotechnical, professional type services, all of that. And when we look at that over time, it's interesting, our region is almost 50% service economy oriented.
Awesome. Thanks for the color on that. Appreciate it. Any further questions from the commission? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Do we have to have public comment?
Oh, sorry. Is there anyone in the chambers wishing to speak on public comment for this item?
We have none here.
Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close public comment. Bring it back to the commission.
Commissioner Becerra, happy to make a motion. I move to adopt the 2024 Washoe County Consensus Forecast.
This is Rob, for the record, I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. We will close item 6A and move to item 6B. RPC training segment, projects of regional significance as defined in Nevada revised statutes and further established by RPC Resolution 23-02.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Nate Kusha for the record.
So this is a little training item for you guys on projects of regional significance, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of process as well as a little bit of history, and helps you get some of those training hours. It also leads into our next item on our agenda and gives you some context there. There we go. All right. So with that, back in, I believe, 1993, Assembly Bill number 647 was passed, and this states that the Regional Planning Commission shall adopt guidelines and procedures for the review of whether a proposal is a project of regional significance. Along with that, we have our Nevada Revised Statute 278.0278, which requires that any project of regional significance must be found in conformance with the adopted regional plan of the time. So with that, there are specific guidelines, and thresholds for what constitutes a PRS that are outlined in state law. So these include things like specific triggers based on a proposed amount of new dwelling units, hotel rooms, employment, sewage generation, water demand, et cetera. And it also considers some specific project types, things like electric substations and transmission lines over a certain kilovolt. However, NRS also grants the RPC a power to establish guidelines for projects of regional significance that are in addition to those thresholds outlined in state law. And that is if they will have a significant effect on natural resources, public services, public facilities, and/or regional form of the region. So some examples of this that are in the current adopted RPC resolution for the guidelines of project of regional significance are a new geothermal well or mining operation within 20 miles of the Truckee Meadow service area, or a project that will alter the Truckee River or its tributaries or any 404 adopted wetlands. There are more, obviously, in the full resolution. You can see these are just a few examples. So a little historical context. Since the original PRS resolution, which was adopted in 1993, 6 resolutions have been adopted altering those guidelines. The most recent, for some of you who know this, who were here, was adopted last year, and that's our current RPC resolution 23-02. And that last adopted resolution really was a lot of housekeeping edits, such as fixing clerical numbering mistakes, updating references to statutes and other documents, and adding missing PRS guideline resolutions, which edited and replaced previous versions, as well as the inclusion of language regarding historic, archaeological, cultural, or scenic resources in Section 1, Bullet E. And again, you can see that whole resolution in your packet there and see what that pertains to. Back in 2006, there was language added that addressed the reconsideration of a PRS if an amendment would cause a project to either exceed any of the thresholds contained in the Section A of the guidelines that the original project did not already exceed, or increase the impact of the overall project by 10% or more to any of the thresholds contained in Section A of these guidelines that qualified the original project as a PRS. So what that's saying is if it hit that original threshold of like 625 units, and we heard it as a PRS, if it goes another 10% beyond that at a later date, we would rehear it as a project of regional significance. So since that 2006 language, or actually since 2003 rather, that's as far back as our records go, we've had about 97 project of regional significance cases, only 3 of which have been reconsidered per this language that was added. So we don't hear reconsiderations often, does happen. So with that, that's kind of a history and some information on PRS. We're gonna learn a lot more about PRS in a minute as well, but I did want to kind of touch on the training aspect here. So regional planning commissioners are required to complete 12 hours of training in land use planning. We have developed a website, a portal here that you can see that provides links to materials that are required by state law for this training, as well as a link to the regional plan. We also have a variety of elective opportunities on this portal that you can check out. Also, you guys can attend land use planning related events to acquire elective training hours, things such as the American Planning Association conferences, et cetera. And on the portal with the required materials, we see that if you do all that training, which you need to do, should fill about half of that. So it should fill about 6 hours of your training. So that leaves 6 other hours of elective materials that you need to complete. If you've already done this training, I know some of you have, you don't need to do it again. The one-time thing, 12 hours. So if you've done it, great. If you haven't, we will send you a link, or it's also in your packet, to this portal. And we also ask that you fill out the self-certification form, which you can see right, the big white button in the middle there on the portal will lead you to that. And there is password protected, so we'll send an email with the password to you all as well, so you can track your hours on that. So, I think that's all I have. Yet again, if you've done the training, don't do it again. One-time thing. There are the required readings. It's all outlined on this page as well if you need information. You can also suggest of some of these optional materials. We've had commissioners do it in the past. They think they have things that would be good to include in these training. Reach out to us if you have something you'd like to suggest, and we can get it up on the portal for all the commissioners to utilize. So, with that, if there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, we'll move on. Lovely. Wow. We do have a motion. I don't need to know if we need to. Great. Lovely.
I think no.
That's all I got.
I don't know, do we need public comment on that one? I think,
Jessica Prunty for the record. No, you're not taking action. No
Thank you.
public comment necessary.
Mr. Chair, can I just weigh in really quickly on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is Jeremy Smith for the record. I just want to say, if you have any questions, if the training thing, self-certification thing's not making sense, or you want a hand, just give us a buzz, shoot us an email, we're there for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no, Commissioner Becerra?
Yeah, it's hard to tell if this is on. Is there a date by when we should complete the training?
I don't know if there's a required date. I believe there's something in a year after you're on the commission you're supposed to have it done with, but I'm not positive on that. I'm going to throw it over to legal.
Yeah, it's a year.
Yeah.
What was it?
It's within 1 year.
With, Jeremy for the record, Jeremy Smith, within 1 year, I believe is the answer, yes.
Okay.
Lovely.
Jessica Prunty for the record. That is correct, according to your statutes.
All right. Dream team. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing no additional questions or comments, we will close item 6B and open item 6C. Status update on research to include schools as projects of regional significance, presentation of history of regional planning concerns and objectives regarding schools, and possible direction to staff, including conducting further research and analytics and/or coordinating with Regional Planning Governing Board, Regional Planning Commission, Washoe County School District, charter and private school stakeholders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremy Smith for the record. I'm going to take us through these slides as well. That's a mouthful, but it's very accurate. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. So as we just learned from the training segment, thank you, Mr. Kusha, that the projects of regional significance, thresholds and triggers, basically the guidelines that are included in Resolution 2302, RPC Resolution 2302, are really come from two sources. The first is directly from state law, from NRS 278026. There's specific definitions right in there, and those are mirrored exactly in our guideline at this point. But also, 278.026, I believe Section C, one of the sections in there, grants this body the power to establish guidelines in addition to those thresholds and triggers indicated directly in the state law. If, as Mr. Kusha was kind enough to tell us about, if something is deemed to have a significant effect on natural resources, public services, public facilities, and/or the adopted regional form of the region. So that, this body has utilized that power to add and sometimes subtract guidelines from the resolution over the history of the 6 different resolutions that have been passed. And in fact, I believe as an attachment to the last item, there's a history of those ins and outs of what got added and what got taken out. So we've established that. Next slide, please. And so in terms of recent history around PRS and what the agency's been working on, we certainly have been engaged for some time now since really late 2018 in a discussion with this body and the Regional Planning Governing Board and interested stakeholders about, is there a nexus between new school approvals, proposed school locations, and projects of regional significance? So we've been having this conversation since 2018. We took a bit of a pause for COVID. COVID kind of paused a lot of things, and it just made it very difficult, especially early on, to continue that conversation. We picked it back up again in 2021, and what it led to was the creation of subcommittees for each body to kind of go away and really kind of evaluate what are we doing, how should we approach this, what are the facts, and really talk about it. And so we also sort of in that moment changed the kind of direction of the effort to be more comprehensive, because we recognized that the guidelines resolution could use a once-over. We found some mistakes that were in there, some repeated numbers, some inaccuracies, things changed, like the Washoe County Health District is now the Northern Nevada Public Health. So there's just little things that need to be cleaned up. And so we went through with those subcommittees, and we did a comprehensive review and fixes that we suggested, and that ultimately was adopted in August of 2023. However, it stopped short of actually adding in a guideline that specifically addressed schools as a land use with any kind of enrollment threshold. So we did the cleanup, but then we sort of paused. And next slide, please. And so we had the conversation, deliberation, right, centered around how our region plans for new schools. We kind of, through the process, and now with a little bit of distance, have kind of understood there's really sort of two elements to that we're going to talk about in a little bit later in the presentation. But basically, there's a long-range planning perspective, which we get with all public facilities, whether it's wastewater, water, roads. We're thinking about what are we doing in 5 years, what are we doing in 10 years, how about 20 years? The regional transportation plan, for instance. So there is a Washoe County School District's facilities plan that they work together with us in lockstep, and changes to our plan or changes to their plan, much like the regional transportation plan or regional water management plan, which is pretty cool. But with the PRS discussion, we're trying to figure out, even with that information and knowing about the future potential, now we're at the moment of a decision about a particular land use, in this case maybe a school. And are there certain parameters of that school that would raise it to the level of needing a very detailed review that we would perform as we would for these projects of regional significance? And just generally in thinking about how we might craft a guideline to trigger that, we thought about things such as student enrollment, which thus relates to the number of trips in and out, the use of the facility, and as well the locational aspects. Is there potentially another school nearby? The co-location of multiple schools kind of exacerbating the impact. So those are ideas that basically got suggested and talked about, but never settled. Next slide, please. So we never actually proposed an enrollment threshold or a guideline. We got close, but we decided to take a step back. But before we go to there, over this discussion, we have learned that there are concerns from both the school district and from the charter and private school community around implementing school approvals in this PRS process. One of them is that maybe the PRS conformance review process would take too long, or does it happen too late in the whole development and review process? Typically, there's a lot of initial investment that happens very early when it comes to finding a school site, and there's concern that with PRS at the end of the line, that then all of a sudden this body would say no, and maybe there would be a loss of money, obviously a loss of time, and some negative impacts to that. Further, in trying to establish a new guideline, it's not specifically in state law. We're going to need to show that there is a significant impact on natural resources, public facilities, regional form. So concerns from both the charter and private community and the school district have indicated that currently we have inadequate information to make that finding. And frankly, that's kind of where we got as staff as well. We didn't feel like we necessarily had the tools to say unequivocally, this is the line that we should draw. So, and that's a valid concern. And then I think another concern is that what we were sort of proposing, and I can kind of explain why in a sec here, but we were accepting the Washoe County School District's facilities plan, but then potentially, targeting just charter and private schools and kind of almost like singling them out. And we've heard concerns from all parties that if we're going to do this, it needs to be universally applied to all school types. So those are concerns that we took to heart, learned from, and have helped to evolve our thinking about how we want to continue to approach this and, take this to continue the discussion. Next, please. Okay, so where are we today? We got to that August 2023 comprehensive review, did not include the schools guideline, but we got that through. So the PRS resolution's in really good shape. But we also said, hey, we're doing a regional plan update. At the time, there's only 5 of us. And, there's just a lot that we have to do to pull this off. And so we talked to this body, and everyone was in agreement that we should kind of pause, not totally stop doing work on this, but change our focus to the update and bring back this item once we get through that process. And we're right now on the verge of being able to solve the regional plan update. And so it's appropriate that we've come back here a year later to start talking about this item again and hopefully get to a resolution that everyone can live with. Next one, please. Okay, so what have we done since last September? Well, we worked on the update, the public infrastructure plan, which is forthcoming, and the natural resources plan. We got a lot of stuff out there, but we did not stop thinking about schools, talking about schools, listening to and watching meetings online of both the local jurisdictions, the State Public Charter School Authority, and in fact, we researched some analytical tools that hopefully could help us get that information that would be necessary to understand where we should draw that line in terms of the threshold for student enrollment, for instance. One of those tools that may be available to us, in fact, at a demo with the company today, is something called Placer AI. It's one example of a software tool that tracks mobile devices and allows you to basically count and get a feel for visits to a given area. And so at the time, back a year ago, that we were talking about this, we just did not have the resources to say, put up a traffic counter at all schools locations and gather that data. That was sort of out of scope, out of our resource. But if we were able to acquire a software product that could do that for us or help us to understand that, that would really lend some data-based evidence weight to why we would choose a certain thing. So that's actively being pursued. I spoke with Parks Department at the City of Sparks. They've licensed this tool, and we were able to do a demo and get some information about trips in and out of I think we picked the Doral Academy at that time, but you could pick any area and get that information. So we're actively working on that and trying to figure out if we can get access and do some analysis. Next, please. So here we go now, with that in mind and the work that we've done, we're ramping up to do a lot more work on this topic. And so now we want to think about those 2 tracks. Again, the long-range planning track and what I've referred to as the current planning track field, but really just an analysis of a specific project that is regionally significant. Those are really 2 different things. If we're looking at a facilities plan, we're going to give it obviously a very robust review, but there are many considerations. We're looking across the region. We're looking at every potential future school location. We're just not going to be able to give it the rigor that we would give a specific project that triggered our project of regional significance thresholds. So, the long-range planning aspect from the school district perspective, and they're providing us with the Washoe County School District Facilities Plan and also their Facilities Modernization Plan, we think that's working really well. And we're really getting a good handle on where future schools are planned for, where they're going to be working on existing schools to make them better. But to our knowledge, there is no facilities plan or long-range planning information for even publicly funded charter schools, unless they're, started the process with the state authority. Then we would have sort of a heads up that something's happening. But absent that, we don't have that kind of information. And further, we don't have that kind of information for private schools. And it may not be appropriate to get that, but we can sure try. So that is a gap that we are trying to address with this conversation. How can we get charter and private school long-range planning information folded into our public infrastructure plan, folded into our understanding when we bring you a project for review and we're looking at standards table PF1 and it's saying, has the roadways are available and adequate, or the schools are available and adequate, or planned for in a 10-year time frame. With the district schools, that's something we can actually point to and say, look, but with these other schools, we cannot. So we want to try to somehow, to the best of our ability, to the longest outlook of time, bring that information to bear in our long-range planning efforts. Moving on, though, to the certain project. Next slide, please. Right, certain individual projects can create regional impacts. whether we've considered them in a long-range plan or not. I mean, something like a Costco might trigger over 6,250 trips daily, which is the state statute for trips to trigger a PRS. So basically, there's things like the size of the project, the nature of the project. You know, Nate mentioned specifically transmission lines. That's defined in state law. If it's 60 kV or higher, it automatically needs to come before this body. And then, or other regionally significant aspects, like the thing you mentioned about the 404 wetlands or alteration of the Truckee River banks. Those are things that this body and the community in general has deemed are regionally significant, and thus we look at them. So this is the idea that can we find a set of triggers that relates to school approval for new schools where those regionally significant impacts are going to be felt, and can we, make that guideline part of the resolution, and in so doing, address that certain project impact to the region. So that's another gap that we're trying to address with this process. So on both sides of this, there are some holes that we want to try to fill in. Next, please. So next steps after today. Today was an update. I think we're kind of turning the engine back on, trying to get this thing going. We want to present this similar update and any feedback from today's discussion that you guys have to the Regional Planning Governing Board at their October 17th meeting. We want to continue the research and data analytics with Placer AI. We have legal counsel's memo as well, which does a great job of just recounting the entire history of how TMRPA has been involved in school approval process or not involved, and sort of what that looks like. And so that's more information that we have now at our disposal, thank you, that everyone can read and think on as we continue this conversation. And then it was really Chair Andriola of the RPGB, in discussions with legal counsel and I and the vice chair, that suggested we convene a meeting of Washoe County School District staff, leadership from this body, leadership from the Regional Planning Governing Board, local charter and private school stakeholders, and potentially local jurisdiction staff. Bring everyone together and see if we can reach a consensus on, and hopefully based on some of this data we talked about, but how can we reach a consensus together on what sort of factors, whether it's student enrollment, locational aspects, whatever they come down to be, what are those factors we can all agree on are regionally significant, and then utilize that consensus to craft the guideline ultimately for inclusion in the resolution. So hopefully we can get that. Not a guarantee, but that's going to be a plan, and we think it's a pretty darn good plan. So next slide, please. Okay, so there's a very long motion. This is the opposite of the other motion, right? But it's very accurate, again. And obviously, before you need to read that or say, you don't have to say that either, I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, legal counsel has done a lot of research lately, so she's going to be able to answer some questions as well. So there it is. Let us know.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll bring it back to the commission. Do we have any questions from the commissioners?
I don't have a question, but I do want to make a comment since I was involved in so many of the earlier work done on this project. If that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, first of all, I really have to give a big thank you to legal counsel for the extensive history that you provided and all the steps that were done, because it really reminded me of all the work that staff did and we've done over the past few years. So thank you for that background. And, when this came up, I did not support the initial motion. I did not feel like the threshold at the time was, I thought it was too low. And especially, it was based on a lot of trips generated, and it just didn't meet that threshold. And so I'm really in support of this motion and supporting the further research and getting consensus from all the interested parties. So thank you for this. I think this is a good way to move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other questions or comments at this time? Commissioner Becerra?
I do.
Oh, sorry.
I do as well. I actually concur with Shelley on this. I got in the middle of this when lawsuits were threatened and everybody wanted to go forward, and then everybody was like, oh, let's put the brakes on this. And nobody really understood the direction that this was going to go. So I concur with what Shelley said, and I really appreciate what legal has done with this and putting this in perspective so that I think Shelley and I are pretty much the only members that actually have an idea of what was going on at any particular time on this. Everybody else on the commission now is new. This was a hotbed of the private charter schools were going to sue the hell out of us over, I'm not sure what it was at one point in time. And so I really appreciate everybody wanting to go back and say, hey, you know what? We need to come to an agreement on all of this so that everybody comes to the table and we all have a stake in this so that it's not just one little thing. So I really appreciate the work that has gone into this and the fact that you guys are coming back to us going, okay, we understand that we need to now come back with something that's a little bit more solid and everybody understands what it is that we're trying to do and not pull the wool over anybody's eyes, which nobody was trying to do in the first place. But I think that it was more that nobody understood the ramifications of everybody's interests involved. So thank you, everyone, for all the due diligence that you put forward on this. That's all I have at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll move to Commissioner Becerra. Did you still have a question or comment?
I did, thank you. I echo those sentiments by Commissioner Kramer and Reed. Finger snaps to legal, of course. And great groundwork the past year by staff on doing all this research. My question is, has staff reached out to maybe other counties or municipalities of kind of similar demographics or parity to our region to kind of inquire how they've approached or addressed this problem, or challenge, I should say?
This is Jeremy Smith for the record. Not to date, we have not. The project of regional significance, power, if you will, is fairly individualized to this region. It's not a very typical implementation in other regions that we're aware of, but I still think that we learned some information about what's going on in Incline from Washoe County Commissioners today, so that's a good place to start if there's some differences up there. I think it's good call to take a look at some other communities that are and how they handle it, just for some context, so that's a great idea.
Just a follow-up, if I may, Rob. So with that, how can this commission support or foster staff's efforts between now and the next meetings?
Another great question. I think make sure to read legal counsel's memo because it's got a tremendous amount of info. We actually, do the training, take a look at all the materials that Nate has provided as the attachments. We have a very, I think, a good record that you could go back and take a look at some of the staff reports, or even if you're so inclined, there is video of these things as well. In fact, when I was doing the research, I had to get a VCR from my mom so I could take an old VHS tape from like 2000 and put it in there. But trying to figure out what had happened. But I think just being as educated as possible on the concept of what we're trying to do and bringing that to bear in the discussions as we move forward is going to be key. And I think it's going to be very, from the leadership of this body and the Regional Planning Governing Board coming together with the stakeholders, I think it's going to be a really important step. Maybe after we get some more information from that, I'll have a little more insight. But we've got legal who wants to chime in.
Great, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Jessica Prenti for the record. Just going off of Commissioner Becerra's comment about what are other communities or counties doing in regards to this issue. Of course, your regional planning statutes are unique to Washoe County, and there isn't regional planning anywhere else except for Clark County, and it's a different creature. Mm-hmm. There is a project of regional significance statutory definition in Clark County. It's much looser. It's not as robust as ours. But I think the point that you raise is very valid because it ties right into what is regional's lane. Regional planning is, you are a body of special and limited jurisdiction. And there's always this line of not wanting to trod upon the autonomy of local jurisdictional planning efforts and getting into what they're doing. And maybe we do know that under state law that in Washoe County, the school district and the local jurisdictions, City of Sparks, City of Reno, and Washoe County, all got together to find out what are going to be our standard specifications for approvals of schools within your local ordinances, and to have consistency and conformity across the board. And that those changes were made on the legislative level to help facilitate the building of schools. And this kind of came in at the same time with WC1. And so in some ways, what this commission and maybe further discussions might determine is this going to be a regional issue at all, as far as identifying a project of regional significance? Or maybe there's going to be work done at the local jurisdictional level. We don't know yet, but it's something to be cognizant of. And I think it would be very interesting to find out what other counties are doing as far as their planning around schools. And if they're using certain mechanisms that might be available to the local jurisdictions here, that might be something that should be raised during these discussions if this body so approves of that action.
Thank you.
This is Rob. I got
Yeah, go
a
ahead,
suggestion. Being a member of a couple different boards that deal with changes to schools and stuff, special use permits and things along that line, I would suggest that if you want to get kind of a feel to how Washoe County approaches this, I would talk with planning here at Washoe County and see what their guidelines are in terms of what triggers a special use permit, what triggers an admin permit, and things along that line. Just to try to help you find the answer that you're looking for.
Thank you.
I just, what was the atmosphere like in these meetings? Was it cooperative? Was it hostile? Hey, you're infringing on our turf here. And has that part been settled out?
Great question. This is Jeremy Smith, the record. I think everybody was professional, but there was clear concerns raised by the different parties, and they've held fast to those positions, I would say. So it wasn't a lot of movement from, so I think it's going to be, we've just kind of been on pause. We haven't really addressed that, but I think we're starting to now, especially with the evolution of our thinking and what we're trying to address and how we're approaching it. So I think it will be very telling when we try to see if everyone will get in the room together. I will say that in my communications to the school district and the charter and private stakeholders, they've expressed a willingness to get together.
So whatever we decide, they have to do it. Is that correct?
Well-
if I was on the other side, I would really object to it. But you know how these things grow. You start out at this corner over here, and then it expands and expands and expands. Before you know it, you have a desk and an office there.
Jeremy Smith, the record again, I think we're always seeking a collaborative approach, a consensus approach, and I think that is borne out in the history of why we backed off, because it was clearly not going to be that, and we didn't want to subject the agency to legal ramifications per se, when there can be a better or a different path that doesn't require that. Ultimately, it could get there. That's always on the table, but I don't think we want to try to force anything.
Well, playing nice is the way to go. I mean, and there has to be something for everybody in it, otherwise it's not going to be a good deal. And then you'll end up having to revisit it, and who knows what's going to happen. So, when's the next meeting?
Excellent question. So our next move will be to go on October 17th and update the Regional Planning Governing Board with this info that we've brought together today and your feedback. And then per the motion, we're saying that between now and our December meeting, we've got a few tasks. So I'm going to go over in the director's report, which is really about the regional plan update, but we want to try to convene this meeting we've talked about and bring back to the regular December meeting the results of that, so that we can dig in as this body on what we want to do next.
Commissioner?
Commissioner Lazarewski, is the governing board, do they still have a subcommittee on this item, or have they disbanded that?
There still are two subcommittees. We would have to appoint new members because of the lapse of time. Historically speaking, for this body and the governing board, it's generally the immediate past chair, the current chair, and the vice chair. So then you have one person from each jurisdiction represented on the subcommittee. And we had discussed about whether or not we wanted to propose trying to reconstitute the subcommittee at this level. And I think we just wanted to try to get some consensus amongst the decision makers of what direction to go in. And then Chair Andriola of the governing board came up with, this concept of let's see if we get everyone in the room and what they say. And in the meantime, I know that TMRPA staff is going to be working on gathering empirical evidence to determine so that you can objectively assess whether there's impacts. And so regardless if there is ultimately consensus, if this body makes a finding that is supported, that you find that there's a significant effect of schools of a certain size or whatever other criteria, a significant effect upon public facilities or regional form, then you are within your statutory authority to move forward with an adoption of the PRS guideline, identifying them as such. And we just want to make sure that we have a clearly defined parameters, because local jurisdictional planning staff have to use those guidelines to try to flag, is this a project of regional significance or not? And so they need to make sure that they're not dealing in an area of gray, that they have real clear demarcation of what is or is it not. And so I think that's hopefully where we're going to be going.
So refilling those subcommittees would be dependent on the outcome of this meeting.
And it could be, that's what might be decided, is that after this next meeting, it's like, okay, we want to drill down even farther, and we want them to be public meetings, and we want to have subcommittees formally reintroduced into the process.
Thanks.
I got one more. This is Rob for the record.
Yeah, please.
Given what I've just heard, you've only got 2 months to get it done. October, November, and then it's coming up in December. I just want to make sure that we give this enough time to make sure that we dot our i's and cross our t's. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. Jeremy Smith, the record. Agree. And there's still a lot to be done in between now and December. So it's very reasonable. I think, correct me if you think this is wrong, legal, but I don't think we have to make a final decision on adding a guideline in December. Okay. I think we just need to, have a more robust conversation with more information and more of the understanding of where the parties are at today.
This is a big package.
Jessica Prunty for the record. I agree. I think we just want to have some forward momentum at this point in time. It's been a little while since we've touched this topic. And as Director Smith pointed out, clearly framing this in these two goals, there might be a very creative solution, and one that certain charter school stakeholders that have multiple schools already and are planning on building more schools would be willing to provide information on an annual basis to regional planning to fold into their annual report. And that would help satisfy that long-range planning priority. And then, I think, where the discussion's going to be, and a lot of focus will be on whether or not schools should ever be considered a project of regional significance. But maybe we'll be able to get movement in one area, and we'll just see what happens with the other area.
Yeah, Commissioner, please.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Becerra, for the record, I'm happy to make a motion.
We haven't had.
Oh, I'm sorry. But before public comment, I guess I'll just say that I do appreciate the North Star and the conversation as to where this is going. I do appreciate that there are kind of milestones or dates for 2 months, and it's good to know that there's flexibility, that if it just doesn't feel right, we can pivot and extend that time to allow for more conversations to happen between stakeholders. So.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Any further questions or comments from the rest of the commission? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and make a comment before we move to public comment. But I just largely echo the sentiment that was shared by the rest of the commissioners. I had, a little tongue-in-cheek, the good fortune of coming on to this body, I think at the time, as an alternate. And my first or second meeting with this body as an alternate basically dovetailed just right into we're talking about litigation. And so that was, I guess I kind of came in at the peak with not a lot of information or context for how we got there, except for what I could learn in effectively a month or so period of time. So I think the approach that was taken to kind of pin it for a year with competing priorities that were laid out by Director Smith made a lot of sense. At a personal level, it's certainly given me the ability as acting chair to get up to speed on this item in a more meaningful way, so I can actually be constructive to whatever future conversations we have. Just want to extend gratitude for the level of work that went into providing this update and giving us kind of all of these details into, how we got here effectively over the last 20 or so years, right? I think it's really important to highlight the fact that, in some way or another, this has been a relevant item that's gone unresolved for a period of time. And I think it's going to be incumbent on us and all of the relevant stakeholders to, hopefully find a solution that works and isn't controversial. So I definitely support the motion as proposed. I think it's important to get momentum back on this. I know it's an item that's important to a lot of other stakeholders that went on pause for a year. So I think it's good to have some deliverables by December that can orient us in a direction, and then, hopefully in the, coming weeks, months, whatever it is, we can arrive at a solution. So with that, I'll end my comments and open public comment. Do we have anyone in the chambers wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead.
No, just going to say we don't.
Great. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment, and I can entertain a motion.
Commissioner Becerra, for the record, happy to make the motion. In the spirit of conditions, would you like a condition on the reaching out to different counties, or just as is? It was kind of a light joke.
No, if you'd like to add that in, we're going to do it either way.
I'll defer judgment to you and just leave it as is, I suppose. All right, here we go. I move to direct staff to continue research and data collection and meet with RPGB, RPC, WCSD, charter and private school leaders, representatives, and stakeholders to address ways to obtain long-range planning information to account for charter and private schools, and receive input, information, and attempt to reach consensus of what types of schools should be a PRS, and report back to the RPC at its regularly scheduled December 2024 meeting.
This is Rob for the record. I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We will now close item 6C and move to item 7, reports. We'll start with item 7A, members and directors' reports.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Director Smith, for the record, I have a short report. Basically, thank you for that discussion. That was very helpful. Clearly, we have in front of us the adoption of the regional plan update, the 2024. And so we've made a slide because there was a shakeup. Thanks again to Commissioner Kramer for alerting us to the conflict that we had with one of the meetings in the City of Sparks Planning Commission. So since that, we have been able to figure out dates that work for all of you to be able to have our 3 public hearings that are required in advance of the adoption meeting of the Regional Planning Governing Board. We'll share this with you as well, so you have it. But basically, the first public hearing we're planning to bring to our regularly scheduled October meeting on October 24th. So no special thing there. That's going to be in this chambers. The requirement is that we have to hold a meeting physically in each of the 3 jurisdictions. And so this actually will constitute the City of Reno jurisdiction. So that'll be at 6 p.m. at our regular meeting there. And then Wednesday, November 13th, that will be the second public hearing. We're targeting Marvin Piccolo School. We did that school previously. We were looking at Galena, but then we realized that that's in the sphere of influence of City of Reno. And we thought to keep it super clean, we would make sure that we went to a location that was squarely in the unincorporated county. And so we think we do have that. I need to confirm tomorrow that in fact we've got the location, but it does look like it's going to be that. So we'll get that confirmed and be sure to share that with you for the Wednesday, November 13th. And then everyone was kind enough to work with us to reschedule to our reserve date. We were slated for that first Monday in the week of Thanksgiving. It's always a difficult proposition to get folks together around the holidays. So appreciate that the reserve date seems to be able to work for everyone. That'll be on December 2nd. That's a Monday. And that's going to be at the City of Sparks Council Chambers. And in fact, that will be also our regular November meeting, so we may also have regular business of the day items to go along with on that day. But basically, everything we're working on, so the natural resource plan, fully baked. Version 3 available, out there, good to go. Regional plan update red line, still in version 1. A couple of things that need to be added. Obviously, prior to October 24th, get that. Public infrastructure plan, our dashboard is created. Honestly, with the switch in schedule, it allowed us to kind of get to some things that had fallen to the wayside with the update kind of that was happening. You know, it was all coming to a head for that October 10th adoption. So we've moved away from that PIP document for a bit, but now we're squarely back into it. So that draft should be very much available very soon. We're vetting with our consultants. We're going to share with jurisdictional staff, and then we'll make it available. And per previous discussions with legal, you know, we're going to bring on October 24th these versions as baked as we can get them by the 24th. But we have until December 2nd also, I think, to tinker with some of this if you guys find things in there that you have concerns about, or if something is mistakenly reported or whatever it is. And so ultimately, we want to bring the absolute final versions on December 2nd. And then the idea would be that if everything is good to go, you guys would vote to recommend adoption to the governing board. And if that happens, then we will bring the regional plan update to the Regional Planning Governing Board on December 12th, 2024. Cool. So with that, I've already mentioned our next meeting is going to be October 24th right here in these chambers. And if you have any questions on this, please feel free to reach out. I'll be sharing this slide or similar information as soon as we lock in Marvin Piccolo. Thanks for your flexibility on the scheduling.
Thanks, Jeremy. We'll move to item 7B, legal counsel's report.
Yes, thank you, Jessica Prenti, for the record. Thank you for your thoughtful comments today and your consideration of the PRS item. I'll be folding all of that into my writing that I've prepared for you and updating it to submit to the governing board as well for their consideration. So we'll see how this all goes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll close item 7, move to item 8, requests for future agenda items. Seeing none, we'll close item 8 and move to item 9, it's public comment. Do we have anyone in the chambers wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close item 9 and move to item 10, written correspondence.
There's none.
Okay, we will close item 10 and move to item 11, adjournment.
Commissioner Becerra moved that we stay another 2 hours. I move to
Do a
adjourn.
roll call vote on that?
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
Second, this is Rob, second.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.